If you've always felt like you didn't quite fit, not with the generation ahead of you, and not quite with the one behind you. If you grew up playing outside until the streetlights came on, but also remember the exact moment the internet changed everything. If you carry both a deep nostalgia for a simpler world and a fluency in the digital one that followed, then there is something you need to hear now. You are not between generations by accident. You are a Xennial. And the psychology that formed inside you during those specific years, in that specific window of history, is unlike anything that came before or after. Born between 1976 and 1985, you grew up in one world and came of age in a completely different one. You had a childhood that was largely analog. Saturday morning cartoons, handwritten notes passed in class, phone calls on a cord that stretched around the corner for privacy. And then, just as your brain was finishing its formation, just as you were stepping into adulthood and identity and career, the digital revolution arrived. Not gradually, all at once. And you adapted, because that is what you do. But adaptation always leaves a mark. This video is about that mark, about what it shaped in you, what it cost you, and what it quietly gave you that most people in your life have never fully understood. If you're new here, welcome to Inner Wise Woman, a space where we go beneath the surface, into the psychology of who you are and why. If what you're hearing already resonates, subscribe right now and drop the word love in the comments below. You are exactly who this community was built for. Now, let's go deeper. The term Xennial, sometimes called the Oregon Trail generation, wasn't coined by researchers in a lab. It emerged from lived experience, from the collective feeling of an entire group of people who kept trying to identify with one generational label or another, and kept coming up short. Too cynical and self-reliant to feel like millennials. Too digitally fluent and culturally optimistic to feel fully Gen X. Caught in the middle, as always, but not in a way that felt like loss. In a way that felt like a very specific, very unusual kind of wholeness. Because here is what the science actually tells us. The years between roughly 10 and 25 are the most psychologically formative of a human life. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for identity, decision-making, emotional regulation, and long-term thinking, is still actively developing all the way into the mid-20s. Which means that whatever is happening in the world during those years doesn't just become a backdrop to your story. It becomes the architecture of your mind. For Xennials, that architecture was built across two completely different cultural realities. The first half of your formation happened in the 80s and early 90s, a world of physical presence, boredom that led to creativity, face-to-face connection, and the particular freedom of being unreachable. The second half happened as everything began to digitize. Email, then the internet, then mobile phones, then social media arriving just as many of you were in your late 20s. Old enough to approach it with healthy skepticism, young enough to adapt without resistance. That dual formation is not a gap in your identity. It is your identity. Psychological profile is genuinely distinct, and once you see it clearly, so much of your inner life will begin to make sense in ways it never quite has before. The first and perhaps most defining trait of the Xennial psychology is what we might call adaptive resilience. Not the resilience of someone who was never hurt, but the resilience of someone who learned early that the world changes without asking your permission, and that your survival depends on your ability to move with it. You watched entire industries transform overnight. You built careers on skills that became obsolete and rebuilt them on new ones. You learned technology not in school, but on the fly, through necessity and curiosity, and a refusal to be left behind. This is not a small thing. Neurologically, the brain's capacity for adaptation, what scientists call neuroplasticity, is at its peak in adolescence and early adulthood. Your brain was literally at its most flexible exactly when the world demanded the most flexibility from you. You were shaped for change in a way that neither the generation before you nor the one after you truly was. Gen X adapted from a place of established identity. Millennials adapted because they never knew anything else. But you adapted while you were still becoming. And that process left you with a psychological agility that runs very deep. The second trait is a layered relationship with nostalgia. You feel it strongly, the pull of the analog world, the simplicity of a childhood without constant connectivity, the particular quality of boredom that used to turn into imagination. You remember what it felt like to be truly unreachable, and some part of you misses it with an ache you can't always explain. And yet, you are not stuck in the past. You don't romanticize it to the point of rejection of the present. You hold the old world and the new world simultaneously, with a kind of dual citizenship that most people around you simply don't have. Jung would recognize this immediately. He wrote about the tension of opposites, the idea that psychological depth is created not by choosing one side of a contradiction, but by holding both. The Xennial lives this tension daily. You are both the child who played outside until dark and the adult who checks 3 screens before getting out of bed. You are both deeply skeptical of technology's effect on human connection and genuinely grateful for what it has given you. You contain multitudes, and you have always known it. The third trait is a finely calibrated authenticity detector. Growing up before the age of personal branding and curated online identity, you developed real relationships in real spaces where people couldn't hide behind filters or carefully crafted profiles. You learned to read people, their body language, their inconsistencies, the gap between what they said and what they meant. And now, in a world saturated with performance and presentation, your sensitivity to inauthenticity is almost uncomfortable in its precision. You can feel when something is constructed, when someone is performing rather than being, when a message has been engineered rather than felt. This makes you an extraordinarily perceptive friend, partner, and colleague. It also makes certain modern social environments feel quietly exhausting in a way you've struggled to name. The fourth trait is a complex and often painful relationship with work. You entered the workforce with high idealism, shaped by a culture that told you that effort and loyalty would be rewarded, and then collided, often hard, with economic realities that had very little interest in that contract. The financial crisis, the disappearing of stable career paths, the rise of the gig economy. Many Xennials absorbed these shocks during the exact years when professional identity is most central to the self. And the result, for many, has been a particular kind of quiet burnout. Not the dramatic collapse, but the slow erosion of a person who kept giving more than was ever returned because they were raised to believe that was how it worked. That erosion is real, and it deserves to be named. There is something else that shaped the Xennial psychology in ways that are only now beginning to be fully understood, and it has to do with emotional intelligence. Specifically, with how you learn to feel and how you learn to hide what you felt. You grew up in an era that was emotionally conservative by modern standards. The 80s and early 90s were not a time of open conversations about mental health, about childhood trauma, about the long-term effects of growing up in a home where things were difficult and nobody talked about it. You were raised, largely, by baby boomers and early Gen Xers, who had their own unprocessed wounds and very few tools to address them. The message, spoken or unspoken, was clear. Be strong, keep moving, don't make it a bigger deal than it is. And so you did. You learned to compartmentalize with remarkable efficiency, to feel something fully in private and present something manageable in public. To process pain quietly, often alone, often through music or journaling or long solitary walks, the analog coping strategies of a pre-therapy culture generation. You became skilled at functioning through difficulty in a way that looks, from the outside, like strength. But it is also, sometimes, loneliness wearing a very convincing mask. This is where Jung's concept of the persona becomes relevant and important. The persona is the face we present to the world, the mask we construct, often in childhood, to meet the expectations of the people and environments around us. For Xennial women especially, the persona was often one of competence, of being fine, of needing very little. And the more that persona was rewarded, by parents, by teachers, by partners, by employers, the more it solidified. Until the distance between the mask and the real self became a source of private exhaustion that was very hard to explain to anyone who hadn't lived it. If you have ever felt deeply known by almost no one, if you have wondered whether the version of you that most people see is actually you, this is part of why. But here is the reframe, and this is important. The emotional intelligence you developed in that environment, the ability to read people deeply, to regulate yourself under pressure, to understand nuance and complexity in human behavior, these are not byproducts of difficulty. They are gifts forged in difficulty. They are the reason you are the person others come to in crisis. The reason you can hold space for complexity without demanding simple answers. The reason your empathy, when you finally give yourself permission to express it fully, lands with a weight and a warmth that people remember for years. You were not emotionally stunted by your upbringing. You were emotionally deepened by it. The work now is not to manufacture feeling. You have always felt everything. The work is to stop apologizing for it, to stop managing it down to a size that makes other people comfortable, to let yourself be as full as you actually are. If this is speaking to something real inside you, I want you to subscribe to this channel right now. Every week we go into this territory, the psychology of women who feel deeply and think deeply and are finally, at this point in their lives, ready to stop shrinking. This community was built for you. Because here is what the Xennial experience ultimately produced, beneath all the adaptation and the resilience and the quiet competence. A generation of women with an extraordinarily rare combination of groundedness and openness. You are grounded because you remember a world before everything was instant, before every feeling needed an audience, before identity was something you performed for strangers online. That groundedness is an anchor. It keeps you connected to what is real, what is human, what actually matters. And you are open because you lived through transformation and survived it. Because you know in your bones that change is not the end of anything. It is always, always the beginning of something else. So let's bring this all the way home, because everything we've talked about, the dual formation, the adaptive resilience, the emotional depth, the persona you built to survive, the groundedness you carry from a childhood that existed before the noise, all of it points to something that I want you to sit with for a moment. You have always been a bridge. Not in the passive sense of something people walk over without noticing. In the active, intentional sense of someone who understands both sides of a divide and can move between them with grace. You bridge the analog and the digital. You bridge cynicism and hope. You bridge the emotional conservatism of the world you grew up in and the psychological openness of the world you helped build. You are, in the most literal sense, a translation layer between two completely different ways of being human. And in a world that is increasingly polarized, that demands you pick a side, declare an identity, plant a flag, and defend it, your capacity to hold complexity is not a weakness. It is one of the most urgently needed psychological gifts of this moment in history. Jung spoke of a process he called individuation, the lifelong journey toward becoming fully, authentically yourself. Not the self that was shaped entirely by circumstance, or by what others needed you to be, or by the masks you learned to wear so young they started to feel like skin. That self is not lost. It was never lost. It was simply waiting for a moment of stillness long enough for you to hear it again. For many Xennial women, that moment is arriving now, in your 40s, in the pause that follows decades of building and striving and adapting, in the quiet that comes when the children are older, or the career has plateaued, or the relationship has settled, and you find yourself, perhaps for the first time in a very long time, with enough space to ask the question you've been too busy to ask. Who am I underneath all of this? Not the role, not the function, not the capable, adaptable, quietly exhausted woman who holds everything together.